Hand over your work." He barked the command while flinging a half-chewed granola bar directly into the trash can, as if the snack had personally insulted him. He did not even look at me when he said it, keeping his eyes glued to his high-end smartphone, scrolling through social media as if my presence were merely a minor inconvenience in his busy afternoon. Julian Vance, 27 years old, with a neck like a swan and a brain resembling a warm jar of mayonnaise, stood in my office doorway. He was wearing expensive loafers with no socks and wore the smug smirk of someone who had never been fired, never been held accountable for a single mistake, and never paid his own car insurance premium. I stared at him from my desk, wondering which was more tragic: the fact that he did not understand the technical complexity of what he was asking for, or that he genuinely believed he was entitled to it. 2 weeks before that moment, I was the sole lead engineer running point on the most important product launch in our company history. My name is Walter Crawford. I am 50 years old, and I have spent nearly 3 decades building compliance databases. For the past 4 years, I had been duct-taping compliance code into something stable enough to pitch to major banking institutions. We were finally within sniffing distance of our Series B investment round, a clean $70 million contingent on this rollout going as smooth as Tennessee whiskey. I had overseen every single software module, caught every security patch, and even resolved a critical memory leak at 2 in the morning during the winter holidays while my son unwrapped blocks of building toys next to my keyboard. This compliance platform was not just my daily job. It was my professional legacy. But legacies do not mean a damn thing when nepotism shows up wearing designer cologne and carrying a job title freshly printed by the executive assistant of the chief executive officer. One morning during a company town hall meeting, the voice of Donald Vance, the chief executive officer and Julian's father, went buttery smooth over the video conference. Donald announced that to ensure scalability into the third quarter, he was proud to announce that his son Julian would be stepping in as the strategic product lead, not vice president, not director, but strategic product lead. Near as I could tell, that title meant he got to touch all the buttons without knowing what any of them actually did. The very next morning, I logged into my terminal and found a system notification that felt like a cold slap to the face. New administrative access had been granted to Julian Vance. Just like that. There had been no prior discussion, no transition period, and no oversight whatsoever. It was as if the board expected me to simply clap my hands and step aside while this hollowed-out smoothie of a human being dismantled everything I had spent years building. Julian waddled into his new role with all the grace of a giraffe on a slippery surface. His first order of business was to change the project name from Fortress Core to Synapse Flow because, in his words, it vibrated with a better energy. Then he called a team meeting to align the engineering department around fresh thought fronts. That meeting was how I learned that people can say words for an hour straight without actually saying anything at all. By day 3, Julian was asking me what a staging environment was. By day 5, he was asking why we even needed a quality assurance team if we trusted our developers. By the end of his first week, he had deleted our entire bug tracker because, and I quote him directly, "Negativity only attracts problems." His leadership style was 1 part startup hustle joke, 1 part spiritual cult, and 3 parts raw weaponized incompetence. Our human resources department was completely useless. I sent a long, concerned email to them after Julian accidentally wiped a customer test database during a midday demonstration. Their reply came back within an hour, stating that they encouraged collaborative mentoring during management transitions and that we should uplift rather than obstruct. I almost vomited in my cold coffee. Our chief technology officer, Dennis Warwick, who was usually a cool-headed person, pulled me into a private video call and sighed heavily. Dennis told me to just ride out the storm, keep detailed logs, and back everything up, claiming that the young man would eventually flame out on his own. I nodded and agreed to the plan. But inside my chest, something much colder was setting in. Julian was not just an annoying distraction. He was active, dangerous, and the only reason the company had not imploded yet was because I had quietly established technical guardrails he did not even know existed. He started replacing our verified database modules with third-party widgets he had not even vetted for security vulnerabilities. He scrapped the customer onboarding flow I had built from scratch and replaced it with some untested code he found on a public forum. When I questioned his choices in our team messaging channel, he posted a laughing emoji. Just that. Nothing else. By Friday afternoon, he had removed my account access from 2 of our internal repositories. But the worst part came right before the weekend. I saw a system flag showing elevated permissions. Administrative access had been granted to Julian again, which should have been impossible, because only the chief technology officer and I held those keys, and neither of us had approved it. I clicked deeper into the security logs. The signature on the digital approval form was mine, but it was forged. That was the exact moment I stopped being angry. That was when I started planning. The first time Julian spoke in a strategy meeting after taking full control of the project, he used the word synergy 8 times in under 90 seconds. He suggested that we pivot our compliance software toward gamification layers, as if he were ordering a flavored latte with extra sugar. I watched our senior back-end engineer blink slowly, looking as though he had just been slapped across the face with a wet fish. Nobody clapped, nobody even nodded. But Julian did not notice the quiet room. He was far too busy scribbling notes in a leather notebook as if he had just reinvented the wheel and was trying to decide what color to paint the spokes. This compliance dashboard, Julian said, waving his whiteboard marker like a magician, preparing to pull a rabbit from a hat, is far too linear. We need loops. We need engagement. We need to make this feel like a modern dating application, but designed for financial regulators. I stared at him, across the glass conference room table, wondering what god I must have offended in a previous life to end up sitting there, watching a room full of grown adults pretend a child had not just smeared finger paint all over our software roadmap. Julian turned his gaze directly toward me. "So, Walter, hand over your work. I will take it from here." He said it like he was doing me a massive favor, as if he were rescuing me from the heavy burden of my own labor. I smiled at him. I did not smile because the situation was funny. I smiled because I knew that showing teeth in a grin was far safer than screaming my lungs out. Dennis Warwick coughed into his elbow, looking away. The project manager stared down at her tablet screen as if it owed her next month's rent. Nobody said a single word. They all knew this transition was suicide in slow motion, but nobody was brave enough to stand in front of the train. The human resources representative followed up with me later that afternoon. She told me we should give Julian room to innovate and noted that since I was excellent at writing documentation, I should focus on bringing him up to speed. I told her that I had built the entire system from the ground up. "Exactly," she chirped, as if my statement somehow proved her point. She said it would be good for company optics if the 2 of us collaborated. Collaborated. That is the corporate version of telling you to shut up and take the hit. Within days, Julian started deleting the technical documentation I had written over the years. He replaced my detailed system guides with an artificial intelligence-generated text soup that looked like it had been written by a drunk chatbot, hallucinating about blockchain technology. He stripped out the red flag security callouts I had embedded in our deployment procedures. He removed the rollback protocols from our software pipeline, and he kept bragging to the executive board about how clean his new architecture was. Clean. It was clean in the same way a hospital room is clean after you turn off all the life support machines to reduce clutter. He did not understand the build. He did not care to learn. He was simply painting over structural mold with vanilla-scented spray and acting as though he were a visionary designer. When our quality assurance team flagged his raw code, noting sloppy loops, missing conditional statements, and entire blocks of programming that literally could not compile, Julian responded by sending them an animated image of a man throwing papers into the air. When the quality assurance lead pushed back a second time, Julian tagged me in the team chat and wrote that I needed to talk to my team because they were being overly dramatic. My team. I had spent 4 years building that engineering team. I had hired people who actually gave a damn about their work, people who did not just slap components together and call it innovation. These were professional adults who understood the stakes. They knew that when a financial compliance product fails, people can actually go to prison. And now, they were being treated like children in a nursery because the chief executive officer wanted to play daddy daycare for his undercooked legacy of a son. Julian restructured our launch roadmap, pushing the official release date up by 2 full weeks. He reassigned our lead user interface designer to work on internal culture branding, and he fired our primary contractor liaison without even informing our legal department. When I brought this up with him during a private meeting, trying to remain polite, he snapped at me. He told me that he was leading the project now, and that I was not. He said if I was struggling to accept that reality, I should take some paid time off or simply choose not to come back to the office. That was the moment I realized this was not just a case of corporate incompetence. It was an active extermination of my work. He was trying to erase my footprint entirely. It was petty, cruel, and exactly what I expected from a boy who had never faced a single consequence in his life. So I stopped arguing. I began documenting every single message, every code difference, and every system approval log that bore my forged signature. Julian strutted into the Monday morning status meeting looking as though he had personally solved global warming with a digital mood board. He announced that we were going to perform a full system migration by the end of the day on Friday. He snapped his fingers in the air, telling us to trust the general vibes of the new architecture. This grand claim came from a man who used to confuse cache invalidation with clearing his browser history. I stared at my computer screen, blinking slowly, hoping that if I remained perfectly still, the nightmare would dissolve. It did not dissolve. By lunchtime on Tuesday, our staging environment was completely gone. Wiped clean, there was no backup, no announcement, and no warning. Julian posted a message in the team chat containing an animated image of a toddler smashing a birthday cake. He called it a revamped architecture. What it actually was a Frankenstein monster of half-baked microservices held together with untested plugins he found on online forums. He did not write integration notes. He did not alert the testing team. He did not tell our security operations lead. He simply destroyed our environment and smiled. By 3 in the afternoon, my system's access was heavily restricted. My administrative rights were revoked. The security logs were made inaccessible, and my permissions were stripped down to read-only status. A junior engineer named Fiona Fletcher pinged me in a panic. She asked why their testing suite was suddenly routing to a deprecated application interface. I checked the system panels and saw that Julian had assigned himself as the primary architect on every single network node, using a custom role he had created without approval. I walked directly into the office of Dennis Warwick, closed the door behind me, and sat down. I asked him if he saw what Julian was doing to the infrastructure. Dennis did not look up from his desk. He simply rubbed his temples. I told him that Julian had deleted staging, locked me out of the repositories, and pushed a feature branch straight to the main production branch. I reminded him that the investors were expecting a working live demonstration in less than 2 weeks. Dennis finally looked at me and told me to just ride it out and keep a paper trail, claiming the situation was political. I laughed out loud. We were one corrupted database built away from severe legal liability. I told him this was not politics, but fraud. Dennis spoke softer this time, telling me to just wait. That was the exact moment something shifted deep inside me. It was not a sudden snap, but a quiet tightening of a screw behind my ribs. I left his office and walked back to my desk. I logged into an old system administrator account I had created during the very early alpha phase of the company. The account was buried under 2 layers of old testing configurations, and it still worked. I opened my terminal and began encrypting the last known stable build of our software, version 2.8.4, which was the final version, before Julian touched a single line of code. I moved the entire package to an isolated storage node, tucked away inside an unused database partition we had spun up years ago for European data compliance trials. This partition was completely decoupled from the primary cloud infrastructure. It was running on a slow, secondary virtual machine in an eastern region. But it was incredibly secure and had its own dedicated network bridge. I configured the system to perform a silent integrity check every 6 hours, ensuring that no external modification could corrupt the files without notifying my personal phone. Nobody ever cleaned it out. Nobody remembered it existed except me. I named the folder Client Resource Backup Final, filled it with decoy logs, and layered the access through a dummy protocol that would trigger a connection error if accessed without a specific checksum string. It was not just a backup, it was a digital arc. The remaining days of that week felt like watching a child juggle kitchen knives while the adults clapped politely. Julian ran 2 internal demonstrations using completely fake datasets and claimed we were on track for an official certification that did not even exist. He started holding leadership meetings without inviting any of the actual engineering leads. He tossed around empty buzzwords like experiential dashboards and compliance synergy events, while referring to our client audit logs as legacy noise. Every single time I opened our communication channels, I expected to see someone shout in anger, but nobody did. Everyone was too afraid of losing their jobs. I was busy feeding our secure backup with documentation, configuration files, clean database dumps, and old rollback protocols that Julian did not even know existed. I kept every file under strict version control and timestamped in triplicate. When this system crashed, and I knew it would crash hard, I needed to prove that I did not build the wreckage. I had built the escape route. By Thursday evening, Julian was planning a hard reset of our access permissions to streamline control flow, which was his code word for locking more people out. When I heard about the plan, I did not flinch. I uploaded the latest backup, verified the encryption keys, and smiled. When you build a system from the ground up, you do not just know where the flaws are. You know exactly where to dig. We were only 3 weeks away from the critical investor demonstration, and Julian was walking around the office as if he were already posing for the cover of a major business magazine. He spent his mornings practicing his presentation speech in front of the lobby mirrors, waving his hands dramatically and reciting empty phrases like disruptive compliance ecosystems. He called a team-wide meeting on Monday morning to announce that he would be running the live demonstration himself. He told us that rehearsals kill authenticity, and that he wanted the investors to feel the product in a raw, agile state. He took a slow sip of a green kale smoothie, smiling as if he had just delivered a deep philosophical sermon. Nobody spoke. We all silently accepted that we were now passengers on a sinking ship heading straight toward an iceberg of pure arrogance, sense. I messaged the quality assurance team 5 minutes after the meeting ended, telling them to run every single automated test module without skipping a single check. They ran the tests, and the results were horrifying. Authentication tokens were misfiring under heavy loads. Database write requests were hanging indefinitely. Server response delays were averaging 6 seconds. User interface elements were overlapping and crashing on mobile screens, and a major data retention bug was allowing users to overwrite critical compliance records with simple emojis. I compiled these issues into a comprehensive bug report and forwarded it directly to Julian. Our senior database administrator, who had worked in the financial compliance sector for 20 years, called me on a private line. His voice was shaking as he told me that the system was leaking customer audit logs into the public cache. This meant any external user could read private transaction records simply by executing a basic web request. I added this security vulnerability to the report. Julian reacted to the message with a cartoon animation of a dancing banana. An hour later, the testing team found their access to the bug tracker was completely revoked. The system was forced back to a state where no issues could be logged. When I confronted Julian about this in the hallway, he laughed. He told me we did not need bug reports because they represented fear-based programming. He claimed we were running a trust-based build now, and that negativity in the logs would only manifest bad energy for the project. I had to take a long walk around the city block to keep from screaming. When I returned to my desk, I saw a private message from Fiona Fletcher. She told me that Julian was actively deleting our environment logs and that 3 days of staging history had vanished. It was clear he was trying to scrub the rollback history to hide his mistakes. I asked her to join a private call. She whispered the entire time, telling me that Julian was running everything through a private code branch with no peer reviews, pushing hot fixes directly to production. When she asked him about rollback points, he told her not to worry because he was manifesting stability. He actually told her that the universe would align the code if the team stayed positive. I thanked Fiona and told her to keep her head down. Then I opened the original compliance charter document, version 1.1, written when we were just a small group of engineers coding in a shared workspace, eating cheap ramen under flickering lights. I found what I was looking for in Clause 14b. The clause stated that in the event of emergency protocol violations during a scheduled audit, the founding technical team members were granted a one-time recovery override access. In the rushed chaos of our early days, I had written myself into that recovery clause as a systems architect. I ran the override, which granted me a 5-hour window of system-wide visibility and write privileges. I used the time to secure a clean copy of our last working rollback point into our hidden partition, export a log of Julian's administrative actions, and place a deadman's trigger on the mirror build that would alert me if any deletion command targeted the files. Then I closed the window and wiped my access trails, leaving only a tiny trace that looked like a time zone synchronization glitch. The very next day, Julian posted a photo of himself in the break room holding a marker like a sword, claiming he was slashing legacy systems. That afternoon, our quality assurance lead resigned. The rest of the testing team followed within days, either muting their chats or leaving the company entirely. Our legal department sent out warnings about intellectual property policies, sensing the oncoming collapse. Fiona sent me one final message, confirming that Julian had tried to delete the main container logs and that my security trigger had fired. It was clear he was getting nervous. He should have been nervous, because if he was going to burn the company down, I was going to make sure the insurance policy was written in my name. The new user interface resembled a flashing casino game, complete with neon gradients and chimes that played whenever a user submitted a compliance form. The interface was a nightmare of bright purple and lime green gradients. Every time a user clicked a button, virtual gold coins exploded across the screen, accompanied by high-pitched success chimes. He even added a spinning wheel for compliance achievements. Julian was practically drooling with excitement. He pointed at the large presentation screen, asking if we liked the gamification of regulatory audits. But beneath the flashing lights lay a dangerous button labeled Clean Start. It sat directly next to the Active Data Sync option, glowing like a radioactive cherry. The tooltip explained that it deleted all legacy files for a system refresh. Julian had placed an unsandboxed nuke right on the main presentation dashboard of our production-adjacent build. I asked him if he had actually put a global delete function on the main screen. He smirked, claiming it was a visual metaphor for progress. I warned him that executing a database wipe command on a production-adjacent build without an isolated container was asking for disaster. He shrugged, saying that my caution was the reason the old regime was stuck in the past. Nobody else in the room met my eyes. They had all learned to stay out of the way of his bad ideas. Julian turned to me, pointing his finger, and said that some of us were simply baggage from the old regime. I did not flinch. I walked out of the room, logged into our secure mirror server, and performed a final sync of our stable code. By midnight, the recovery build was completely isolated and online under the name Echo 3. The company had rented a warehouse space downtown, decorated with exposed brick walls, metal beams, and overpriced minimalist furniture. The air smelled of expensive espresso and nervous sweat. There were 15 potential investors representing 3 major venture capital firms, along with a quiet investigator from the Regulatory Commission who sat in the back row. Donald Vance was glowing with pride, telling the crowd that his son had led a revolutionary redesign of our core platform. Julian stepped up to the podium, launched into a speech filled with empty buzzwords, and swiped through his hollow dashboard. He waved his arms like a street preacher, shouting about unchaining the enterprise from bloated legacy anchors. He claimed that the old system was too slow and that they had achieved a 92% increase in efficiency. I knew this was a lie because we had not even completed integration testing. The investors leaned forward, watching the animations. Then, Julian announced that they would pivot beyond the past and tapped the bright red Clean Start button. The screen flashed once, then went completely black. The entire interface collapsed into a series of terminal errors. The path to the legacy root directory was gone, deleted by the command Julian had written. The database connections failed, and the presentation monitors died. White text on a black background scrolled by at lightning speed, displaying hundreds of errors. Julian began sweating, mashing keys in a panic, claiming there was a minor rendering delay. Donald stood up, stammering about cutting-edge modules, while the investors began packing their briefcases. The regulator in the back watched the disaster unfold with a critical eye. Dennis Warwick turned to me in silence. I spoke clearly, stating that I had not touched the active build in weeks. Julian spun around, accusing me of sabotaging the logs, but I pointed out that the logs showed a system override executed by his own user account. I sent a single email to the board of directors, the legal team, and Donald Vance. The email contained our forensic access logs, proving that Julian had forged my digital signature on the authorization forms to bypass the security protocols, violating California Penal Code Section 470. This unauthorized intrusion also violated Title 18, United States Code Section 1030, rendering his administrative changes void ab initio. The legal team read the documents in silence, their faces turning pale. The legal counsel pulled Donald Vance aside, whispering that forgery of a system architect's signature to bypass security protocols was a clear violation of state and federal laws. They informed Donald that his son had committed a serious breach of compliance that exposed the entire firm to massive liability. Donald looked as if his world had collapsed. He turned to Dennis and asked if the platform could be saved. I stepped forward and explained that while the active build was destroyed, I held a complete secure mirror of the stable build under the system name Echo 3. Donald Vance, the chief executive officer, lunged toward the table, begging me to restore the system and promising to restore my administrative role. I told him that I would not be staying and that the recovery layer logic was my proprietary property, written under a separate testing pilot. I offered to lease the system back to them on my own terms. My primary condition was simple. I would never see Julian Vance in the office again. Donald looked at the contract, looked at his silent son, and signed the document. I packed my bag and walked out of the building without looking back. I had 3 job offers waiting for me in my inbox from companies that valued actual engineering competence over family connections. As I stepped out into the afternoon sun, I knew they would be paying rent on my software for a very long time.